Even though every character is valuable within Genshin Impact, a tier list is a great way to start a critical thinking discussion about the strengths and weaknesses of character toolsets. Today, we'll be looking at exactly that, assessing what makes each character unique and what makes and breaks them from earning a top spot in the highest tier. This tier list will be broken down into 4 categories: S rank, A rank, B rank, and C rank. To keep things on a fair playing field, I will be examining every character at their Constellation 0 level. This basically means every character at their base form without any upgrades. However, I will be assessing the potential each character has through their constellations as well. Lastly, please remember that Genshin Impact is a PvE game and that a tier list isn't what makes or breaks a character. Now, let's start off with the base 4 of our roster. The Anemo Traveler is a great Anemo free-to-play support character with shorter cooldowns than some other choices. The potential of the MC also comes free, as you unlock their constellations through story elements, AR rank rewards, and sigil shop purchases. However, some of that strength is wasted, as their elemental burst isn't as strong as it could be due to it passing through bigger or heavy enemies, reducing the amount of DPS it has the potential to do. Anemo Traveler basic attacks through passive skills will gain access to a wind blade that deals 60% of Traveler's attack as Anemo damage. Their elemental skill deals AoE Anemo damage, which causes greater Anemo damage over a larger area. This skill can be held to increase damage and AoE potential. Through the free constellations, this skill will allow you to vortex enemies in, pulling them closer to the ability. Overall, the Anemo MC is a solid choice and a free to play one at that, which earns them a spot in the A rank category. Lisa, the Librarian of the City of Mondstadt, is an Electro-Catalyst user of the base 4 roster who packs quite a punch if she sets up correctly with her elemental skills. However, for the amount of damage it does, it takes a considerable amount of time to set this up properly, not to mention her long cooldowns. While her elemental burst tries to be a great AoE support, it falls short of this ability by knocking enemies outside of its effective radius. Overall, Lisa is quite the burst damager, but at the cost of taking too much time with an unfortunately unstable AoE support elemental burst. Amber, the free-spirited bow pyro user of the base 4 roster, is supposed to be a gatherer support character through her elemental skill taunt ability. With her elemental skill, she throws out a Baron Bunny that attracts enemies then explode over a long period of time. Unfortunately, for the amount of damage it does, the amount of time it takes to activate along with its cooldown does not help her cause. While if you're lucky enough to unlock self-detonate for more damage opportunities on her elemental skill through her constellations, this does not help that the rest of her kit is slowly damaging as well, along with her cooldown timer not having the ability to be shorter. Overall, she has a weak support that can be unfortunately found much easier through other pyro users. The only reason to really invest into Amber is for certain abyss clears if you don't have any other choice or you simply like her design. Kaeya, the chivalry cryo user of the Knights of Favonius, is not as bad as some people make him out to be. With a short cooldown elemental skill, along with a nice duration elemental burst skill, allows for him to trigger multiple elemental reactions, making him great for cryo support. His support abilities only get better if you're lucky enough to get multiple copies of him, which will practically double his damage and could potentially make his elemental burst go over double its base duration. His base attacks also have the unique ability of teleporting behind enemies, which can get behind annoying enemies with shields or change the direction in which he is converting. Overall, Kaeya is an okay support with the ability to do constant elemental reactions with his elemental burst, but unfortunately lacks damage in most other places in his kit. Noelle, the Made by Day and Night a Night, is a Geo Claymore support all-arounder that everyone could use on their roster due to her being a guarantee on the beginner wishes. Noelle tries to be a solid DPS, but gets outclassed easily while also offering support with Geo shields through her elemental skill and HP regeneration through her basic attacks while her shield is active. Her elemental burst starts off with a Geo slash and gives her a few buffs that increase her attack and converts damage into Geo damage. Noelle's kit also has the unique ability of scaling off defense for her damage and healing, which makes her more tankier than most other characters. However, she has a very long cooldown elemental skill and it's hard for her to gain particles to get her elemental burst. Overall, she struggles to keep up DPS until further constellations, and while she can utilize heals, her skills are unfortunately on long cooldown timers, making it unstable for consistent heals and defense buffs for the team. Sucrose, the Shy Alchemist Anemo Catalyst user of the Knights of Favonius, is another support character that can give great buffs such as increase in elemental mastery for the team member's element that she reacts with. What she has in support ability, which becomes stronger through her later passives, she lacks in high cooldowns and energy requirements, making her a hard character to consistently see at her greatest potential. While she could potentially lower her cooldowns to constellations, it is unfortunately on an RNG chance of a mid-basic attack combo string. Overall, while having great support, the unstableness of the rest of her kit makes her fall a bit short of being the great support she has the potential to be. Barbara, everyone's favorite shining star idol of the Favonius Church, is a Hydro Catalyst user that exceeds at being a support as a healer role. Seeing that she is free for everyone who reaches AR 20 at the moment, she can be a great addition to anyone's team investment who is looking to run Abyss. While her healing isn't as strong as some other characters, she still gets the job done. Unfortunately, her kit does scale off HP, so she will be doing considerably low damage to enemies around her. Her elemental skill allows you to put a nice duration wet status around you that can inflict constant reactions. However, as your character is the one that becomes wet, this can be used against you. This skill also has a long cooldown, which limits her healing a bit, but should be okay if you're building her with support energy recharge in mind to get more elemental burst from her. If you're lucky to get a max constellation Barbara, she can even have the ability to revive an ally once every 15 minutes. Overall, Barbara is a great support option that will unfortunately lower your DPS and could allow for some hazard situations for you, but makes up for it with her useful healing role within the Abyss. Razor, the WoW Wolfboy Electro Claymore user, has a very damaging DPS kit. This kit consists of fast energy recharge through his elemental skill passive Orb ability. While Razor does exceed in damage, he is not very strong at AoE or being a team player, as he needs to constantly be out on the field to make best use of his elemental skill passive and cannot switch out during his elemental burst. Because he can't make use of consistent elemental reactions outside of certain situations of various other characters' support abilities, this overall lowers the potential of higher DPS he could be doing within his kit. Overall, Razor is great at small radius AoE and single target damage, but falls a bit short of being an absolute powerhouse due to his stingy nature of his kit. Beidou, the confident captain of the Crux fleet, is an Electro Claymore user who has a very unique elemental skill of counterattacks. The damage from these counters can be increased by inflicting perfect counters or counter a max of 2 attacks for the maximum damage output. While she has lower basic attack DPS than Razor, she can make up for it with her elemental skill damage output when used correctly. On top of this, she has great utility elemental bursts that can create consistent elemental reactions for a decent duration of time. The main downside of her kit is the slow uptime her DPS could reach from enemy attack intervals being too slow. While she can get around this through self-inflicting counters by standing in fire, this is a situational upside depending on the area, enemy, or team comp you're using, which could make her diversity on team comps few in numbers. Overall, she has the potential to do great damage given the right opportunity, but falls a bit short of consistent uptime on her DPS that other characters can easily compete with. Fischl, the lovely Chunibunyo of the Adventure Guild, is an amazing support and DPS Electro Bow user. Being Electro makes her very easy to fit on just about any comp, along with some of the highest damage in the game. Her elemental skill leaves her Raven Oz on the field to continuously damage and inflict AoE Electro status to enemies. Positioning of this skill is even at your fingertips, as you can hold the elemental skill to choose where Oz will be launched. Her elemental burst, while not being the most useful for damage, is a great way to reset Oz's timer to make him stay on the field much longer, as her elemental skill has a considerable long cooldown timer. If you are lucky enough to get her constellations, not only can you increase the damage of her basics, elemental skill, and elemental burst, but you can even gain the ability to increase AoE radius and gain access to self-heals. Overall, even without a strong, easy to control elemental burst, the rest of her kit just allows for consistent elemental reactions with swapping while negating most of the skill cooldowns through her elemental burst, makes her an amazingly strong, high damaging, high utility character. Xiangling, the Master Chef Liyue, is a pyro polearm user that has amazing support abilities everywhere within her kit. Xiangling's elemental skill sets Gooba down to deal consecutive pyro damage. With unlocked passives, she can even increase attack damage through a chili pepper that is left on the ground for you to pick up. Xiangling's elemental burst is a giant pyro flaming wheel that stays out even if you swap out characters, making this another great skill for elemental reactions. While her elemental skill got nerfed with higher cooldowns, Xiangling's basic attack can inflict pyro damage to enemies on the last hit, as well as decreasing pyro resistance while increasing pyro damage if you're lucky enough to get her constellations. Overall, Xiangling's a great all-arounder with solid damage that is great for everything in the game at the moment and can fill the role of support or DPS at any given moment. Geo Traveler is another one of the many elements our main character will have. While their elemental skill and elemental burst have the potential to do a lot of damage, Geo Traveler elemental skill is known for breaking up the flow of the match and can be annoying to deal with, lowering your DPS in some cases, and making you lose out on effective AoE opportunities. The elemental burst also does great damage, but can potentially lose out on some of its percentage depending on how many of the shockwaves hit the enemy. Being Geo as well makes them lose out on possible elemental reaction DPS opportunities in place of elemental shield protections for your party. Overall, while the Geo Traveler is great for world exploration, they lack in consistent combative abilities that are clunky despite having access to strong elemental damage on a relatively short cooldown cycle. Xingqui, the heir to the Feiyun Commerce Guild of Liyue, is a Hydro Sword user that specializes in support abilities. Xingqui's elemental skill performs strikes before putting ranged swords around the character. This ability has great utility as it remains through swap outs and reduced damage taken when hit while regenerating % of HP during the process of one of the ranged swords being broken. The character also within the ranged sword formation has the ability to be interrupted from skills less often. Xingqui's elemental burst is also great at utility as attacks during it can happen when he is swapped out. While his elemental skill doesn't have the drawback of making you wet like Barbara, he doesn't have the scaling she does to keep the healing as consistent despite the damage reduction. Overall, Xingqui is a solid Hydro choice but lacks in excelling in any of the categories he tries to fit. Ningguang, the Lady of the Jade Chamber, is a Catalyst Geo support character that also has the potential to do very high damage. Ningguang has the unique ability of her basic attacks accumulating Star Jades that can be used during her charge attack to increase her total damage. However, these are lost if you switch to a different character. Her elemental skill is very unique in the ability of reflecting enemies' projectiles. Ningguang's elemental burst also has the unique ability to react with her elemental skill if it is nearby to throw more AoE Geo shards at the enemy, creating some high damage opportunities. Overall, while she can create some high damaging opportunities for herself while giving Geo shields and projectile covering to the party, being a Geo element sets her back in elemental reactions while having to constantly stay in to not lose her accumulated Star Jades. Chongyun, the Banisher Evo from Liyue, is a Cryo Claymore user that is great at support and DPS. His elemental skill is a giant swing that makes a Cryo Circle Frost Field on the ground. This skill has a unique utility ability in the fact that swords, claymores, and polearm users can use this to trigger cryo damage with their basic attacks, making the skill amazing for setting up elemental damage opportunities. Chongyun's elemental burst is also a great damaging skill. If you're lucky enough to get constellations of Chongyun, you can further increase his damage and utility by allowing him to decrease elemental skills and burst cooldowns by 15% when allies are within his frost field. Overall, Chongyun is a great cryo asset to any team who needs this element with solid damage and great utility for burst elemental damage. Bennett, the righteous good-natured adventurer of the Adventurers Guild, is a pyro sword user who is a great support with some actual high DPS to boot. His elemental skill, Passion Overload, deals pyro damage launching enemies. This skill has the unique ability to be charged to increase damage but would eventually launch him as well. Also, luckily, this will not hurt him in the process. Bennett's elemental skill does pyro damage in a circular field. Bennett's elemental burst has great utility in his ability to regen allies' HP under 70% while increasing an ally's attack if they are above 70% HP. Not only this, but it has the scaling factor off his base attack. If you are lucky enough to get constellations of Bennett, then the HP restriction for the attack increase is lifted, while also gaining the ability to increase pyro damage. This makes him great for pyro team comps, which will give you an even higher attack increase through the elemental resonance. Overall, Bennett is a very solid DPS with some nice utility options that can fit pretty well when you can keep the uptime on his elemental burst. Venti, the god of freedom for Monstrat, is an Anemo bow user that excels in just about everything he puts his mind to. He has high damaging abilities, some of the best utility and support in the game, while being Anemo, so is very diverse in the amount of team comps he can fit on. Venti elemental skill, Skyward Sonnet, can be tapped or pressed. This skill does high damaging AoE damage when done with Swirl Elemental reaction in mind. This skill is also great for disrupting enemies as it lifts them off the ground. The hold version sends Venti flying in the air while also giving him frames of an armor state during takeoff. Enemies hit with this skill will fall to the ground slowly, allowing for unique combo opportunities such as plunging attacks. This ability with his passive also creates a wind that can be glided and used for additional plunging attacks with other characters or to avoid situations. Venti's ultimate is a giant black hole that is amazing for gathering enemies and lifting them off the ground, interacting with the first element that it comes in contact with. On top of this, his elemental burst energy consumption is average at most, with pretty short cooldowns, making it so this skill is something that you can get relatively fast for high elemental burst AoE damage that can interrupt enemies due to it lifting off the ground. Overall, Venti is one of the best supports in the game at the moment and can deal some extremely high elemental damage while being a top abyss unit for all these reasons. Qiqi, the monotone zombie of Boo Boo's pharmacy, is a cryo sword user and is without a doubt the best healer in the game at the moment. Her elemental skills does cryo damage in intervals while also regenerating HP of the person who is swapped in. Not only this, but if characters are within her passive talent, if the elemental reaction takes place, this HP regen will increase that character's incoming healing by an additional 20%. Qiqi's basic and charge attacks will also regenerate HP for the entire party that scales off her attack power. Despite her elemental skill being on a long cooldown, the amount of hits it do along with the scaling of the healing makes up for his one downside. Her elemental burst does a massive AoE cryo skill and puts talismans on the enemies affected by the skill. When a character hits enemies that are marked, the character who deals the damage will generate HP. Overall, her healing duration while scaling off attack is absolutely amazing, allowing her to easily top up allies while doing some type of DPS, although nothing serious since she is still primarily a healer after all. Mona, the mysterious astrologer, is a Hydrocalyst user that is great as a support and could also work as a decent DPS. First off, I think it should be mentioned that she does have a unique fast dash ability that allows her to go underground and deal wet affix on her way up. This unique mobility option cannot be hit while she's underground as well, which is a nice addition to get out of certain situations. Her elemental skill taunts the enemies while doing continuous hydro damage, which allows for her to be a great support character with some nice damage numbers as well. Because she is a gatherer through her elemental skill, this makes her a nice addition to any abyss team as well. Her elemental burst allows for her to trap smaller enemies in a bubble, which is great for interruptions of skills and does massive damage once they pop. Overall, Mona is very versatile and have access to some of the best mobility options in the game, and she could be your elemental support gatherer, or she could play the role of your main DPS. Jean, the acting Grandmaster of the Knights of Favonius, is an Anemo sword user that has a great all-around kit. Jean's normal attack has the unique ability through her passive to have a 50% chance to regenerate party's HP that scales off 15% of Jean's attack. Charge attack is also unique in the form of a launcher that is great for interrupting enemies and making them fall slowly to the ground. Her elemental skill is a high damaging short cooldown skill that consumes stamina based on how long you hold it and vortexes enemies in within a certain radius while giving you the opportunity to position where you want to launch the enemies. This is a great tactic for certain dungeon floors that you can launch enemies off the stage, making it to where you don't really have to fight smaller enemies at all. Her elemental bursts don't do much damage but also regenerates HP that scales off her attack. Because his attack does Anemo damage, this makes Jean a nice, decently damaging healer support that has great fluidity on any team due to her being an Anemo user. Diluc, the Dark Knight hero Monstrat, is a Pyro Claymore user with monster damage and a top tier pick for any fire team composition. Diluc through his passives have the added benefit of doing charge attacks for much longer as he consumes 50% less stamina while he makes his duration 3 seconds longer. His elemental skill, Searing Onslaught, slashes enemies dealing pyro damage. This can be performed up to 3 times before going on cooldown. Keep in mind if you wait too long in between usage, it will also go on cooldown. Because the cooldown timer also starts after the first hit is pressed, you can weave basic attacks in between each press of his elemental skill, making it loop into itself consistently. His elemental burst, Dawn, releases a flaming bird that does massive AoE pyro damage. This also causes Diluc to gain access to a pyro enhancement buff, which gives him pyro damage to his normal and charge attacks for a set duration. Through Diluc's passives, this can last 4 seconds longer than his base form and will give him a 20% increase in his pyro damage. Overall, with Diluc's massive percentages on his base attack and skill damage, he is a master of main DPS that will have you shredding enemies down with the right pyro team composition. Keqing, the Yuhenge of Liyue Xiqing, is an electro sword user that has a very flashy style. Her elemental skill, Stellar Restoration, allows her to have amazing mobility options by placing a lightning stiletto that she can go to with a second press of her elemental skill or pressing to charge a button, which will clear the marking, dealing AoE electro damage. The press version will do electro damage and place the mark wherever it hits. The hold version allows her to manually place where she wants the stiletto to go, allowing her to do unique setups and combo opportunities. Because this teleport can be manually placed, she is actually one of the only, if not the only, other character outside of bow users that can pinpoint weak points effectively. Keqing's Elemental Burst is a massive AoE rapid slash attack that deals massive electro damage. Through her passives, this ability when casting her Elemental Burst, Keqing will have her crit percent and energy recharge increased by 15% for 8 seconds. Overall, she's a great choice for a main DPS, and being of the electro element allows her to be at the forefront of some great elemental reaction opportunities. Klee, the fleeing son of the Knights of Favonius, is a pyro catalyst user that excels in burst damage. Klee basic attack allows her to throw bombs and deal AoE pyro damage. Her elemental skill, Jumpity Dumpity, has a maximum of 2 charges, which mean it can be performed twice in a row if neither of her charges are on cooldown. This skill does AoE pyro damage and splits into mines that will detonate over time or when enemies come into contact with them. Both Klee elemental skills and normal attacks through her passives give a 50% chance to obtain an explosive spark that allows her next charge attack to cause no stamina and deal 50% increased damage. Her elemental burst allows basic attacks to continuously summon sparks and splash, dealing big AoE pyro damage. Overall, Klee does great AoE pyro burst damage, with her elemental burst and passives leading the front. While her elemental burst also does AoE pyro damage, she is required to stay in to deal out the damage during it, hurting her elemental reactions and versatility a bit. And last but not least is Xiao of the Liyue Adaptus, who is an Anemo polearm user. Xiao unfortunately wasn't available during the CN open beta for players to test, so it's undetermined whether or not he has received any changes to his kit for the official global launch of Genshin Impact. What we can speculate is that he will most likely be the standard for the main DPS unit for Anemo users when it's his time to shine. If this video was any way helpful to you to understand the strengths and weaknesses of each character in the game at the moment, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to keep up with everything Genshin Impact, as I will be continuing to bring quality educational value to you all in the near future with guides, news, and discussions. Also, please continue to remember that Genshin Impact is a PvE game and that a tier list isn't what makes or break a character. I hope you all enjoyed this video, and as always, my name is Daikin and I'll see you next time. Signing out.